Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Rosh Hashana Daf Yud Beis concludes the Gemara's discussion of the Machlokes Tanaim as to when the world was created and when do we count a number of things from. Is it the month of Nisan or is it the month of Tishrei? The Gemara then goes back to our Mishnah and discusses the final halacha, which is relevant to the Rosh Hashana of Tishrei, which is that of Meiser. The Gemara quotes a Brisa. The Gemara will try to explain the Brisa and the differences between the Brisa and our Mishnah. Then the Gemara will give sources. It'll take a sidestep and give sources for the halacha that there is no Meiser Sheni on the 3rd and 6th year of a Shemitah cycle. Then the Gemara will go back to the Brisa and talk about Rosh Hashanah for Nedarim, what that means, and what its halachos are. And then we'll refer back to Meiser again and discuss when Meiser year begins for certain crops. So we have a number of different discussions here. When did the world start? Rosh Hashanah for Meiser and Rosh Hashanah for Nedarim. So the Gemara was in the middle of this discussion. We've seen Rabbi Eliezer holds that the world began in a Tishrei, and many of other things also began in Tishrei, including the year counting of the Mabul. And Rabbi Yeshua says it began in the month of Nisan. So the Gemara now is describing how the Mabul worked according to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. So the Gemara says when the Torah says it was in the second month, so I understand, according to Rabbi Yeshua, it's in the second month. The Mabul began in the month of Iyar, so it's the second month. According to Rabbi Elazar, that it began in the month of Cheshvan, why is it called the second month? Now, this is confusing why the Gemara doesn't just simply say it's the second month from the creation of the world, but it's not what the Gemara answers. There are some girsas that have that answer, but what the Gemara answers is that it's the second month from the Rosh Hashanah in which the judgment that the Mabul should come began. It's the second month from the judgment time. Now, the Gemara has another question here. We had said that both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed the normal nature of the world when he brought the Mabul by taking 2 stars from the constellation Kima, because Kima was brought up during the day at the time of the Mabul, and Kima doesn't necessarily rise during the day. So the Gemara says, I understand, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this is strange because Kima usually sets during the day, during the time of Cheshvan. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, that is, usually sets during the month of Nisan. However, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Kima always rises during the day, during the time of Cheshvan. So what does it mean that Hashem changed the way of the world, changed nature? Versus changed nature means that he made the water hot. And the reason he did that was because the Averos, the sins that were performed by the people of the generation of the flood, the Dor Mabul, was with heat, was with the inflammation for Avera, and therefore they made themselves heated, and therefore he punished them with heat, and he heated the water for them as well. Now, how do you see that? The Gemara says because you see that the word shachacha and vayashoiku are used. The word vayashoiku, meaning the water sloughed away, the water was drained from the earth. That's vayashoiku hamayim. And concerning the anger of King Achashverosh, it says chamasim elach shachacha. Yashoiku and shachacha, very similar. That links the two. And just like Achashverosh's chema, his anger was heat. The word chema also means heat. Here also there was a heat. Okay, now who do we go with, Rabbi Yeshua or Rabbi Elazar? So the Gemara says that it depends if you are the Chachmei Yisrael or the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam. If you are the wise men of the Yisrael or the wise men of the nations of the world, they both agree that we hold like Rabbi Yeshua, and that the world was created in the month of Nisan, and therefore we're going to count the seasons of the sun and the moon and other things beginning in the month of Nisan. Rashi explains there's a number of halachas that are relevant to when the sun and the moon were created. We have to count the seasons of the sun and the seasons of the moon based on that. For example, the seasons of the sun, we need to know when the tkufa is. When is the equinox and the solstice? That's the beginning of each of the 4 seasons. That takes place 3 months and a day and a quarter exactly later than the previous one, because each season is 91 and a quarter days. So in order to calculate when the seasons are, when the tekufos are, the moment of the equinox and the solstice, we have to go back to when the sun was created. So we need to know. So we assume that it's in the month of Nisan because we go with Rabbi Shua. Now both Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umas Olam agree to that. However, Chachmei Yisrael count the years of the world, the history of mankind, from Tishrei. Chachmei Umas Olam, though, counted from Nisan. Now, it's not because Chachmei Yisrael hold like Rabbi Elazar that we count from Tishrei, because like we said, they hold like Rabbi Yeshua, but that's when people count, and therefore that's how they determine the number of the events of the history of the world. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had mentioned the different types of halachos which use the first of the month of Tishrei, Rosh Hashana, as their Rosh Hashana, their starting point in the year. Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa says that vegetables, meiser, and nidarim, vows, all use that Rosh Hashana. So the Gemara says, well, hold a second, he said vegetables and meiser? What's the difference between vegetables and meiser? Vegetables means the halacha that you have to bring meiser from vegetables, and you cannot bring from last year's crop and this year's crop, and therefore we have to know when the crop begins and ends. What is the beginning of the year as far as the crop is concerned, to define the crop for the halachas of meiser. So what's the difference between yerakos and meisers? Why does it say yerakos and meisers? Those are the same halacha. Gemara says no. Yerakos means vegetable meiser, and meisers means grain meiser. And there's a difference. Vegetable meiser is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Midaraisa, there's only meiser on grain and grapes and olives. So this is referring to, so yerakos refers to meiser d'Rabbanan on vegetables, and the word meisers in the brisa refers to meiser d'Oraisa on grain. So the Gemara says, well, you should list the d'Oraisa one first, shouldn't you? Why do you list the d'Rabbanan one first? So the Gemara says every Takana d'Rabbanan is more beloved because it's something we worked hard on, and therefore the Tana lists it first. Now our Mishnah, which did not mention yerakos at all, that's because which did not mention meisers at all, did not mention grain. That's because it says the d'Rabbanan, and you could learn that if there is a beginning of the year for the d'Rabbanan and it's Rosh Hashanah, Kal v'chomer, certainly the Oraisa meiser begins at the same time. Now, the Gemara wants to know, why is it plural? It says meiseros. Well, there's only one meiser, grain meiser. The says no, it refers to meiser behema and meiser of grain. The meiser of animals, again, we know that animals also have a meiser on the yearly crop that's born. 1/10 has to be given to meiser. That also begins at the same time, according to this brisa. So the Gemara says, okay, I know why meiser is plural, but why does it say yerakos, vegetables? Why vegetables plural? So the Gemara says there's two different types of vegetables in Hilchas Meiser. There's vegetables that are generally bundled up and sold like that, and there are vegetables that are sold loose. And they have a slightly different halacha as far as when they are obligated in Meiser. Not every stage of growth or every stage of processing or harvesting has the obligation to take Meiser riding upon it. If it's generally bundled, then the obligation to actually take Meiser only begins from the bundling. If it's generally sold loose, then it only becomes chayv meiser when it gets put into the kli or container that's usually put into as part of harvesting and transportation to market, and therefore it has different halachas, and therefore it's listed as two different types of meiser halachas. Okay, now the Gemara quotes a brisa which defines for us what exactly is the significance of the Rosh Hashana of meiser. So the Gemara says if somebody is picking vegetables, and he picks vegetables on the last day of the year, so anything which he picks before sundown is part of last year's crop. It's part of the previous year's crop. And if he continues to pick after Rosh Hashanah or after sundown, then he cannot take meiser from before sundown fruits to after sundown fruits, or vice versa. They're considered to be two different years. Not only that, they also have different halachos potentially as far as which meisers are obligated in. We know that in the Shemitah cycle, you have 6 years of meiser, and then the 7th year Shemitah doesn't have meiser, and the 6 years of meiser work as follows. All 6 years are obligated in meiser rishon, that's the meiser given to the Levi. Years 1, 2, 4, and 5 are obligated in meiser sheni, that's to be brought to Yerushalayim. as opposed to years 3 and 6 that are obligated in Meiser Ani. There's nothing to take to Yerushalayim. Instead, you just give Meiser to poor people that are around. So if it was, let's say, year 2 going into year 3, so whatever you picked before sundown would be Chayav in Meiser Sheni. Whatever you picked after sundown would be Chayav in Meiser Ani. Neymar says, what is the source of this halacha? Let's sidestep here. What is the source of this halacha that is the cycle of Meisers? And that the year 3 and 6 is Meiser Ani and not Meiser Sheni. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk which describes the mitzvah of Meiser Ani. It says, "Ki sechala lasas kol maser tvuasacha b'shana hashlisha shnas haMeiser." When you finish taking all your Meiser in the 3rd year, the year of Meiser, then you should take it and give it to the poor people, and it lists many type of poor people that you should give it to. So the Gemara says, you call it shnas haMeiser, the year of Meiser. You use the word Meiser singular. That means there is only one type of Meiser for this year. There's only Meiser Rishon to the Levi, and there's no Meiser Sheni. And then it's saying, now go give Meiser Ani. So Gemara says, how do you know that there's only one type of Meiser, and that's Meiser Rishon to the Levi, besides for Meiser Ani? Maybe there's only one type of Meiser, and that's only what I'm about to tell you, which is Meiser Ani. There's no Meiser Rishon either. So maybe year 3 and year 6 shouldn't have any Meiser besides for Meiser Ani. Gemara says, no, that can't be. And the Gemara has an Amor here who says it, and then the Gemara finds a Machokas Tanaim how we have the source for this, that there is Meiser Levi every year, there's Meiser Rishon every year. So one source is from the pasuk which says, "Ve'el had Leviim tedaber v'yamar talayim ki sikhu meiser b'nei Yisrael es maser shanasati lechem b'itam benach laschem." It discusses Meiser to the Levi. It uses the word benach laschem as part of their inheritance. So the Gemara says we have a link therefore between Meiser Rishon and inheriting. Just like inheriting is never lost, there's never any break in the chain of inheritance. There's always somebody to inherit you. Meiser Levi is also never broken. There's a Meiser Rishon given to the Levi every year. There is no interruption in that chain. Now, that's what the Gemara here says. The Gemara also quotes a brisa in which Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that. The other brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, has slightly different limud. He says it comes from Ubaha Levi. And the Levi will come and collect. So he says, Kozman Shaba. Tainli. Any time the Levi comes to collect, he gets. There is no time in which the Levi, you'll turn away and say, no Meiser Levi, no Meiser Rishon this year. There always is that. Okay, this concludes the Gemara's discussion about Meiser for now. The Gemara now goes back to the brisa where it said that Tishrei is Rosh Hashana for Nidarim, for vows. The Gemara says, how does that work? The Gemara says, again, it means that this is how we used to determine the end of the year concerning the time of length of a vow. So if somebody says that I forswear I'm not going to use any of my friend's things, I'm not going to get any hana from his belongings for 1 year. So if he says for 1 year, then he has 12 months from day to day. If he says for this year, then it's until Rosh Hashanah. And even if he's standing on the last day of the year, then he only has to wait until the end of the day. Once the year ends in Rosh Hashanah, then his vow is over. So it says, now even according to the opinion that 1 day cannot be a year concerning other halachas, such as buying and selling property, there are some that say you need at least 30 days, but they will agree that in this case, if someone vows and forswears using anybody else's property or his specific person's property, then it's limited and it ends no matter how long the time is. It ends at Rosh Hashanah. And the reason is because he's trying to pain himself, and just 1 day's worth of pain is painful enough. It doesn't have to continue that thing after more than the day. He's qualified. He said to the end of the year, he meant to the end of the year. It's coming up right now. Alright, now the Gemara discusses what stage of growth creates the obligation of Meiser to determine which year a plant belongs to. That means as follows. We know that you can't take Meiser from 1 year's crop on another year's crop. We know that the break in years is determined by Rosh Hashanah. Before Rosh Hashanah is 1 year, after Rosh Hashanah is another year. The question is, what has to happen before Rosh Hashanah or after Rosh Hashanah to determine that year? Different types of produce have different significant event that places them in a specific year. For example, vegetables, we know, goes by when you pick them. You pick it before Rosh Hashanah, we said, then you'll be part of the previous year, the early year before the Rosh Hashanah. If you pick it after Rosh Hashanah, it's part of the next year. Now, other crops have different things. Fruits, we said, goes by when they begin to appear on the vines. Now the Gemara discusses a few other things here. So the Gemara discusses a crop called tilson, which is fenugreek. It's a spice. It's like a low plant that has seeds that are ground up to make a spice. So the Gemara says, Misha titzmach, from when it sprouts. The Gemara says later, what does it mean from when it sprouts? When the seeds begin to appear. Now, grain and olives. Olives different than other fruits. Grain and olives, that's when they grow 1/3 of their full growth. Says the Gemara, how do you know this? What is the source of this halacha? So the Gemara quotes Rav Asi, according to Rav Yochanan, some say Rav Yosi. The Torah says, Miketz sheva shanim b'moed shnas hashmita b'chag hasukos. End of 7 years, on the holiday, the end of the Shemitah year, on Sukkot. This is referring to the mitzvah of Hakel, which is something that is performed on Sukkot the year following a Shemitah. But it calls it a Shemitah year. Someone says, this is strange. Why are you calling Sukkot a Shemitah year? It's the Sukkot after a Shemitah year. We're saying Sukkot of a Shemitah year. The Shemitah year ended a few weeks ago. Someone says, no, it comes to tell you that on Sukkot there are still Shemitah halachas. That's because on Sukkot is the time of harvest. So any grain which grew 1/3 beforehand is still considered to be Shemitah grain. It's still defined as being from the Shemitah year because it grew partially before, and you're harvesting it now, and therefore you see that on Sukkot there is still some halachos of Meiser. So Gemara says that's a good source, but it doesn't tell you it has to grow 1/3. Maybe it's talking about something which didn't grow at all. Maybe it's talking about something which planted and it grew a tiny bit and it grows mostly afterwards. You still haven't told me how you define it. So the Gemara is going to bring a number of other approaches, which we'll have on Daf Yud Gimel. So what did we learn today in the Daf? We learned that the machlokes between Rav Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua as to when the world began and when we count the world. Chachmei Yisrael go with counting the world from Tishrei, and the Chachmei Umas HaOlam go with counting the world from Nisan. Everybody agrees, though, to Rabbi Yeshua that the world was created in Nisan, and therefore our calculations of the rotations and the movement of the sun and the moon, we will begin from Nisan. We also explained that the second month, according to Rabbi Elazar, means the second month from the time of judgment, and changing the way of the world means that the heat was applied to the water of the Mabel. The Gemara discussed Yerakos and Maisers, two types of Maiser. Yerakos is Derabanan, Maisers is referring to grain, which is Deraisa. Yerakos is two types because vegetables that are sold in a group have different halachos than vegetables that are sold loosely. And grain, we said that there is grain of there's grain meiser and there's animal meiser, two different types of meiser. We said that we define Rosh Hashana as the breaking point between years as far as taking meiser from one year on another. We said that Rosh Hashana also determines which year you're part of as far as which meiser you have to bring. We gave the source for the halacha that meiser sheni is not given on the 3rd and 6th year, because the Torah says that it's Ishnas HaMeiser, there's only one Meiser there, Meiser Levi, Meiser Rishon, and that is given because either the Torah says Val Halavim Tedaber Lemar and calls it Nachlaschem, like inheritance, it never breaks, or the other approach was that it says Ubah Levi, anytime he comes he has Meiser to get. Talked about Nidarim, there's Rosh Hashanah for Nidarim. If somebody says I'm forswearing, I'm vowing not to use somebody's things for this year, that ends on Rosh Hashanah, no matter how long it is until then. And of course, we discussed which part of growth applies to Meiser. When does Meiser, which part of growth, as far as certain produce, determines which year one falls in. Fenugreek, Greek, we said it's when the seeds begin to sprout. And grain and olives, we said it's when the growth has reached 1/3. I think we're still looking for a switch.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.